Can you put the link on YouTube on the chat?
Yes, they're going to do that. Can someone hit record?
Let folks in.
Let's roll. Let them in.
YouTube isn't live just yet.
Fine. Can we mute everyone?
Like, I've tried to clean it and it doesn't seem to clean very well.
180 people.
I think I need to get up and turn on my camera. I thought it was a webinar.
Ebony, can you mute everyone?
There's a gang of white people.
There's a gang of white people, he said.
Who said?
Someone, I don't know, somebody.
Or I mean, I wonder if they feel like
Mute.
it should only be black people.
Turn on your mute.
Somebody mute all.
this is our.
Everybody's welcome. Everybody's
John,
welcome.
please mute everyone.
Please mute everyone.
Everyone must have heard it.
Welcome, everyone. We'll get started shortly.
Is muted upon entry. Host.
This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome back to a second part 2 of Unscripted Unplugged with the A2MEND organization. It's been a long week from last week to this week, and we welcome you to another part of the conversation as we continue to unpack this morning the continual senseless police brutality, continual senselessness of racism. And so many things have transpired from our conversation just a week ago. And we wanted to just start off with this before we begin officially, just to kind of bring us into the context of why we're together. Because it is bigger than just a moment in time, a blimp on the map. This has been systemic. And we just want to address that right now as we kind of set the framework for our conversation and our solutions.
For 400 years, with no seeds of respect. In America's mirror, all she sees is regret. Instead of letting blood live, they begging for bloodlet. Revenge is a dish that's served on platelets. Transfusion of confusion, abusing our intellect. I can't be bought with a $1,200 check, even though $1,200 can make a meal stretch. My mama wasn't rich, but she earned my respect. She made a little bit of money for a lot of blood, tears, and sweat. Jumping up and down on police cars, I'm vexed. After Chauvin killed George Floyd, we got next. Molotov cocktails, anarchy on the set. The rich took the loot, so now we loot shit. Feeling like a caged tiger that's whipped to do tricks. That's why I started fires and yelled and threw bricks. They tried to run me over and arrest me and shit. Tase pepper spray and engage with the kid. They ran up in the state house with them AKs quick. But let a try and do that white boy shit. Won't be no rubber bullets ricocheting. Becky called the cops on the kid, hoping and praying it'd be some Emmett Till shit. Sandra wasn't bland, they hated Mike cause he brown. Trayvon should have had an Aston Martin riding around. Amadou Diallo, it's way too many to follow. Vato, how much of my pride I gotta swallow? God only knows how deep this plan goes. I was dealing with this shit as a teen in Kangos. Harassed by cops, word to my ancestors' souls. And watching that man die slow left a hole. He cried for his mama as the murder unfolded. If it wasn't for them phones, Chauvin would be at home, feeling justified because of George's skin tone. I'm telling it to those with melanin, you're not alone. The new Malcolm, Martin, and Marcuses are now grown. America's a graveyard full of black men's bones. And I ain't got to tell you that Breonna Taylor got slayed in her own home. Had they lived, Sean could have rocked bells. Eric could have garnered attention. Beyond the t-shirts and obituary mentions. Oscar could have been counting grants. Tamir could have went to Rice. They owed them cops nothing, but all of them paid the price. So yeah, you're right. We should protect our Second Amendment rights. Because in a second, a dirty cop can kick the door in at night. A tooth for a tooth and a life for a life. We refuse to live in hell while you living in paradise. Being black in America is like rolling a paradise. But the stakes are way higher, you gambling with my life. Black lives matter. Forever. Instead of letting blood.
Good morning for those of us joining us, an A2MEND organization in the West Coast. Good afternoon, those in the East Coast, and good evening for all those across the world. As we know, last week, this conversation was international, and the struggle and liberation for Black folks through systemic oppression and colonization is international. Systemic white supremacy has unfortunately showed its evilness in the death of George Floyd, which prompted us, amongst many others, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, for us to be called to action. Many of you are joining us in this space from different angles, from different perspectives, from different vantages. And we welcome all of that. We welcome that because we know you're entering into this space at different levels, because some of you are just for the first time waking up to systemic oppression that it exists when you see the torture of a Black man for 8 minutes, murdered. And that awakened your soul. Some of you are tired because this is not the first rodeo, it's not the first hashtag. In fact, some of you have family and friends and come from a generation of ancestors who've endured this. And you're entering this conversation at a different level and energy. And some of you are stuck in paralysis, as we mentioned last week, of saying, what can we do? How do we do? We welcome all of that. Fortunately, we mentioned pivoting the conversation from a moment to a movement. And in that is corralling all of that energy, all of those vibes, and all of that, and transforming that into solutions, because we all, despite where we come from, in fact, because of where we come from, and because of where we work, have a necessary obligation to enact change. So I invite you into this space as activists who are activated, as change agents within or outside your institutions, as solution-centered folks, as healers. I know there's a lot of folks mentioning healing and coping. I had this conversation with a couple of colleges, and the difference between coping and healing is one, coping, you just adapt. You're building resiliency to buffer the adaptation to oppression. Healers break that. They break that. They give you the prescription and the medication and the necessary remedy to fully be whole. One applies Band-Aid solutions, one actually solves deep systemic problems. One maintains the status quo. Coping, you maintain the status quo. How do I avoid the next confrontation? How do I avoid this police interaction? Put your hands up, have your registration license above your head. Don't engage them, say yes sir, yes ma'am. That is adapting, that is coping. Healing is dismantling oppressive systems that even cause that condition to materialize. We want healers. We are asking you to listen and learn and enter the space as healers. One replaces tension with acceptance and serenity. The other one just tells you how to reduce tension. We're beyond trying to survive. We're ready to thrive. We're beyond trying to be passive. We're ready to be action verbs. So we expect you today, no matter what your industry, your role, your responsibility is to be a healer to dismantle this oppressive system. And so with that being said, I'm encouraged to be part of an organization like A2MEND with my good brother, Professor Eric Candy, and all the board members as we unpack today of how you all can be healers and practitioners and solution-focused people to help remedy and dismantle and disrupt and actually build from scratch and whole a system that is just. Because oppression and adapting to oppression is insanity. Brother E. Handy, the floor is yours.
Dr. Bull, good morning. And good morning to all those that are checking in. Thank you for that. And that really gets me to something I want to ask you is, how you doing and are you okay? That is the proverbial question that seems to be asked of Black employees, Black professionals, just African Americans in general. And it is so surface level to believe that you can answer decades, centuries of what Dr. Joy DeGruy calls post-traumatic slave syndrome into I'm a good or I'm well when we're asked, are you okay? There's so much tension that we're holding, not just from the recent slaying and assassination of George Floyd, but to just decades and years of just constant tension and pressure that we live with, we breathe with, we have to engage with as we navigate systems and continue to put on professional emails, continue to put on smiles, continue to give top-notch customer service in the food and service industries, continue to deliver your mail, continue to serve you as first responders. We are continually serving and giving. And when you ask us, are we okay? Really, I'd be wanting to respond, well, no. And I've been not okay before George Floyd. You're just now realizing that I'm not okay. But with that, I want to ask the brothers, not are you okay, but what's really going on this morning? Dr. Breland, I want to bring you into the conversation, if I may, and really ask, I think, the real question that is afraid to be asked, which is, how are you surviving? What have you done to get you through from last Saturday to this Saturday, and what's really going on with you?
Thank you, Professor Handy. First off, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. That's a interesting question, and even to your point of, are you okay? That's always an interesting statement, when I hear that. It's a three-word question that immediately puts me emotionally to work, and someone gets to ask me a three-word question. And as was already mentioned by Dr. Bull and also Dr. Handy, this is nothing new. It's baseline. Then what I do is try to flip the thought and ask, are you okay? The person asking me, because their question is coming from a place of interest and concern. I appreciate the question and the check-in, but why the necessary need to gauge my mood? And And to your question, Dr. Handy, you know, what has been happening over the last couple of weeks, you know, for me, a lot of processing, a lot of looking at history, a lot of looking down deep into myself in terms of what is my role, what role can I play to make long, lasting, deep systemic change in a place that I already knew needed to have change. And what I want to share, I guess, with folks right now, in a sense that, you know, we are here for a call to action, but it's important to be able to reflect on what is it that's causing the cause to action, and have we been here before? And looking at the history, in particular, the civil rights movement. And as this country continues to move toward a majority minority, we're at a tipping point for sure. The new minority have confiscated the resources, either seized control or doubled down on the control of manipulation of our most influential institutions, banks, law enforcement, healthcare, housing, jobs with a decent wage. We've also seen families collapsing, and yes, the collapse of our institutions of public education, both K through 12 and higher ed. Cornel West often says, what do we do about the poor? What are we going to do about racism? What are we going to do about greed? We need to make the powerful uncomfortable. The minority have never been able to control the majority without first denying them their humanity, which by definition,
Preach, Brian.
and is
Preach,
a poster
preach.
board example of hypocrisy, because that also makes them inhumane. None of this has been solved or even at least adequately addressed in the nation under Republican or Democratic leadership. So this is what they say is a nonpartisan issue. The murder of Brother George Floyd set off a spiritual and a moral awakening that must result in true reform. That is what I've concluded. And so when I'm asked, am I okay or what am I doing? I've been frustrated, I've been angry, I've been feeling really heavy. Sleep is not easy, and you don't know which nights those are gonna come. So you toss, you turn, things go through your mind, but you still gotta keep moving on and working through the issue and the pain, and also helping others get through their issue and pain. In the last few weeks, I've even seen resolutions written, pulled together, wordsmith, vetted through the proper channels, and then released broadly for organizations or listservs for people to read or not. While these expressions are necessary and in some cases required, the threat of not speaking out would bear significant social or financial consequences, as it should. So what I've concluded is that there's in fact a significant power shift occurring in the midst of COVID-19, which over-indexed, of course, in communities of color with a disproportionate number of deaths, and one of the worst, if not the worst downturn in the economy of the United States. And of course, there's POTUS 45, who continues to be an instigator and a straight up embarrassment of leadership. I've also concluded that while we leaders, teachers, scholars, practitioners, all who took the time to be here on the Zoom, compared to most Black and brown and poor people, we represent some of the most educated folks on the planet. And with that privilege comes a great responsibility to lead the action steps necessary to dismantle the systems that have harbored, aided, protected acts of unequal and unjust treatment to so many people of color, starting with Indigenous Native Americans who have been almost pushed to extinction and now continue to grind out African American, Latinx, and other people of color, denying them their dignity, respect, and access to opportunity. So I feel like we're in a rebellion stage. We're seeing protests, we're seeing speak outs, the resolutions, even the social media campaigns are moving this along. We need to move toward revolution and transformation that we also desire. I'm speaking a nonviolent revolution of our systems, structures, institutions, and with an unapologetic sense of urgency and unity. Change not only has to be demonstrable and quantifiable, but also sustainable. We need laws, new consequences for those who abuse their power. And so, yes, I'm okay. I'm okay because I have to be. We all have to be. But I know that we can't go back to the way that things were, is what I've concluded. And what I really want to leave you all with also is that, you know, the atrocity of the murder of George Floyd is not only necessarily a Black or white thing, as we see the diversity here on this call and this webinar. When you actually take a look at the incident, and to bring us back to that scene, when you pan out, you see the diversity of police officers even. And while the cop is pinning Mr. Floyd's neck to the ground with his knee, when you look at who was there, it was diverse. But what was important was that they watched the crime go down and they did nothing. They didn't stop what was happening right in front of their faces. And so what I want to do is urge everybody on this call to use your networks and to start uniformly and in a coordinated way to utilizing all political and government channels to not simply write resolutions, but to make demands that institutions do better. The civil rights movement was highly organized. We need to go back to that thinking. And I think people forget that there were many coordinated strategies with the boycotts, marches, voting drives, sit-ins, etc. We need to do the exact same thing because that movement never finished. We need a full-on blitz of legislating and voting. Then things will change history, and we need to do it to scale, leaving a legacy of change for the next generation. Then I'll be okay. So thank you, Brother Handy, for the question.
Dr. Breland, thank you for that and appreciate those words. It is well stated. Very
Powerful, Doc.
That you said transformation is needed and action is now instead of standing on the sidelines. And what's going on for you is that I hear is that you're really taking a pulse and a look and understanding, okay, what power and leverages do you hold and how you can be influential in your sphere. And we really just want to bring everybody into the conversation that today, part 2 of Unscripted and Unplugged is we're really looking at the solutions, the resolutions, and we really want to bring you into the fold on different ways to provide a blueprint for disruption, a blueprint to disrupt the system of systemic oppression for Black, Brown, Asian Pacific Islanders, LGBT, but specifically, we want to talk about the disruption of Black America, the disruption for keeping us to the wayside. And so as we just bring you into today's conversation, and as we continue just checking in with the brothers, because we do want to hear from you. We want to make sure that you're engaged with us on the social media platform at A2MEND. We are also YouTubing live. Please drop your questions, your comments into the chat. We want to be able to engage in this conversation, not a monologue, but a dialogue. We know we have different ways to handle business. We have from very radical ways to more conservative ways to legislative ways. And so we want to engage in a conversation, but it's important that we stop and take a moment to get past the surface level emotional drive-by check-in of how you doing, are you okay? Because we know the answer is we're not okay, and it's okay to not be okay. And sometimes we need a place, a space to say, I am not okay, and beyond I'm not okay, here's what I'm ready to do. Here's what I'm ready to do. For our allies listening, for those who are asking the question, well, what can I do? When I ask, is that person okay? Be ready to move on whatever they bring. And so I want to bring Dr. Foster into the picture and ask Dr. Foster with the need for action, the need for transformation, with understanding that this is more than just a moment, but really we're on the brink and the impetus. This is really just the beginning of a long crescendo of a movement. Dr. Foster, how are you, my brother? What's going on? And how did you survive? And beyond survive, how did you thrive from last Saturday to this Saturday?
Man, I appreciate that, Professor Handy, and I appreciate Dr. Bull's comments and Dr. Breland's comments as well. It's great to see y'all this morning. Seeing all of you in this space makes me feel better. You know, the unity and the solidarity, not only in this room, but across the country is inspiring and it's encouraging. You know, I appreciate the conversations that have taken place over the course of the past week, and the conversation that we had in this space last Saturday was really helpful for me. Especially considering that I've been a college president it's been about 4 months now. And so my campus doesn't really know me yet in that way. And so I'm still establishing many relationships at the college. But my approach initially was, I was concerned about everybody else. You know, how are our students dealing with this? How are our faculty dealing with this, and our staff and our managers? And I was really concerned about the communication and making sure that, you know, that folks were connected in a way in this virtual environment. But I hadn't really stopped to think, how am I doing with this? You know, how am I feeling about this? So last week was real difficult for me. As many of you have been feeling, and as Dr. Breland shared, you know, just feeling tired, emotionally drained, the anger and the frustration of generations of experiencing this in our lives has been difficult. You know, the other piece, you know, I have 2 children. My daughter, Maylia, is 8. My son, Dalen, is 6. We're a multiracial household. You know, my kids are Black, Korean, and Vietnamese. But let's be clear, my kids are brown, right? And so my son wanted to be a police officer. He wants to be a paleontologist now, but he wanted to be a police officer. And so watching the news over the weekend, he had asked, you know, Daddy, I thought police officers are good. Aren't they supposed to protect us? And having that conversation with him, yeah, most are, but, right? And having that real conversation with him, you know, really was challenging in that regard, because you don't ever want to tell your kids, you know, that the police aren't there to protect you. And so, you know, I know he doesn't fully understand it, but we had to have those conversations. So that was heavy. So last week I met with my, well, actually it was on Thursday. These days kind of get blurred, don't they? On Thursday, I had a meeting with my administrative team, the management team. And I felt it was important for me to start the meeting just with my own vulnerability, which I had not done prior to that. And I was prepared to share how I was feeling with my team. And it was important for others to know where I'm at and how I'm showing up to work in an authentic way. And, you know, it was important for me to create that space to check in, because I know we are all experiencing this in our own way. And so that was really valuable. And it was helpful to clear the air and for them to know where I was, but also for me to know where they were in processing this. And as we talked about, you know, it's difficult to manage our own feelings and emotions while being present. That was my challenge, was managing my emotions and being present in these governance meetings and having, you know, to deal with all the things on our agenda to do our college work, right? While all this were emotions that I was feeling. And so that was hard. And so, you know, and not being on campus, I think has also been hard, because we don't have those casual conversations with our colleagues, right? Before and after meetings. So all this has just been building up. And so I just appreciate the conversation we had last week, and I appreciate this space today. But because of the magnitude of all this, you know, and in my role, really looking at, you know, what does this mean and how do I bring it to an institutional level? And so certainly, you know, what that led to with my conversations with the managers is, as many of you have and will have, we're going to have a campus-wide forum next week, really to bring the campus community together, to acknowledge how we're experiencing this movement in our own way, and also collectively. And I feel like that space is going to be so important. I don't know how that will go. I don't know where that conversation will go. But, you know, for me, I made up the mind to turn my frustration and anger into hope. And I have to provide that hope. And that's important for all of us, to have that hope and to leverage this opportunity and this momentum, as Dr. Bull mentioned, to heal, but to change our institution in a powerful and systemic way. And that's what I'm hopeful about. And that's what I'm looking forward to in those conversations. And I know, you know, it's important for us to recognize how we're experiencing this individually, but also what we need to do and what we need to do better and what we need to do more individually and collectively and as an institution. And so I know the open forum next week it's not a one and done, obviously. We all know that. It's only the beginning. But I really think it's important for us to have a broad understanding of where we are as a college and at our own institutions, and then also recognizing where we need to go in the most urgent way, and translate all these feelings and emotions into action. So again, I just appreciate this space and this opportunity for us to come together. So thank you for this time. I appreciate it, Professor Handy.
Thank you, Dr. Foster.
Thanks, Foster.
Kick it over to Dr. Bull now.
Also, if we can check the chat, we've got a couple of trolls in here, and that's expected. If we can remove iPhone as well as I believe Joe MN, please. You know, it's interesting that we wanted to pivot this conversation from being a moment to a movement and having solutions. And I think Dr. Breland had mentioned a couple tangible steps of us really having some dialogue and discussion that's deep and substantiated and change. And so with that being said, if we can go over to the next slide, I want to piggyback off a comment here that was mentioned by Mr. Eric Payne. He said, "Dear colleagues," he said, "you as a select persons to the African-American male learner, our African-American male students are hurting. They are not receiving the promises made by the American community college system. While people all over America are taking to the streets to protest the slaying of George Floyd, protests must also be directed towards other American institutions." Big picture.
Hey, hold on, Bull. Hold on, man. We're not doing this today. This is not what we're gonna do today. iPhone, whoever you are, this is the last time we're gonna say you're gonna have to get out of this space. But the fact that we got to even stop in the midst of what we doing to fight off things like that, this is what people live with every day. This is what your Black colleague, your Black administrator, your Black staff, your Black manager, your Black—
Brother Handy, we gonna I'm monitoring the chat and I'm monitoring all those that are trying to get into the space. Please, I'll handle that, Brother Handy.
Yeah, we're not giving them energy, so let's not give them energy. We got folks on them. We're not gonna give them the space or the opportunity to hijack this. We're not co-opting this movement right here. So back to what I was saying, I want to validate the people in the chat came in, and so one of the chat boxes earlier, Brother Eric Payne, and we feel your pain, had mentioned, based off of what Dr. Breland and Dr. Foster shared, about the systemic failures for African-American male learners. And so when it comes to injustice to African-Americans, especially African-American men in community college, are innocent bystanders in the community college world, Black male completion rates are the lowest among both sexes in all racial ethnic groups. It prompted me what Dr. Breland just shared about those bystanders who were police officers who witnessed the death of George Floyd, right? And so for those of you joining us this call, are you bystanders, ambivalent enablers of the destruction of Black males as you're witnessing that in the completion transfer rate? So with that being said, I know there's been some concrete solutions that have been presented over the past, and I want to introduce a person, Dr. Scott Thayer, who's hopefully amongst all of us have the same energy in dismantling educational malpractice, right? There's malpractice in its various forms and structures and systems. So one of the ways in which we're augmenting that is some conversations about solutions. So Dr. Scott Thayer, if you can help us unpack some of these conversations and policies and solutions, that'd be great.
Well, Dr. Bolt, thank you. Professor Handy, AMEND board members. It is a much needed continuation of a conversation that we've been having. And I just wanted to add a few things prior to digging into the recommendations of things that we can do. I believe people are at a point of frustration and looking at a way for individually to do something. And I think that energy is definitely here with us, but it's also, reflected on our television screen, social media, with all the people reacting and responding. So I think it's so important to really try to equip people with things that they can do individually, as we work towards dismantling the systemic structures that have caused these incidents to take place throughout our history. I think a great analogy when we talk about the murder of George Floyd was the bystanders. One person created the act, and that's the system a lot of times that we are in. and the bystanders have been society. Those 3 additional officers who stood silent and who knew better didn't do anything to intervene when they were watching this slow motion, basically taking the life of a person, right? And so I think, you know, now as we look forward to action steps and trying to figure out what we can do specifically, some of the things that we can do, I think if we can just commit to not going back to the same things that we've always done. And so we've put together some things that we believe are a great starting point through conversations we've had organizationally with our ally partners. We have the recommendations through the African American Student Success Town Hall. And so when we're looking at funding, right, it is critically important that we make sure that we have funding that is addressing race. You know, it's a topic that people have veered away from. It's something that people think, well, we can't specifically address that because it's inequitable. Yet we live in a space that shows us inequities every day. And when we get to conversations at a policy level with the opportunity to make a difference, we find every reason to say we can't do something. So I think it's important that we put that aside and say, well, what are we going to do? Not what we can't do, right? And I think that's where we get internally tied up in knots, because we have processes that state, okay, we can do it a certain way or we can't do that in our meeting spaces, in our participatory governance space. But I think we can agree that what's been happening is unacceptable. And I think we can agree that if we don't do something, we will continue to live in a cycle of excuses and inaction. And so, you know, the recommendations, and we'll go through some of these, but it's funding. Funding is critically important. When you talk about priorities, people ask you the question about, show me your budget, you'll show me your priorities. You know, too many times we find excuses to say, well, we don't have something, therefore we are going to cut. You know, we need to not sit back silently as we see reductions to our student equity and achievement, specifically that program. We know that plays a critical role in support of our students, of our Black male students in particular. And by reducing those things, it creates issues. The fully funding students in their education, that you know, another area that's critically important. We talked about the impact of COVID-19 in our African-American population, overrepresented and being impacted, yet we don't allow the conversation to say, if we're overrepresented in the impact of COVID-19, the coronavirus, then why are we not provided additional resources to combat that? You know, we don't want to sit and say, well, there's no need for that. The need is there, it's right in our face. The data tells us the story, yet we continue to find an excuse not to address those issues.
Yeah. And to build on that, if you want to chase down structural racism and white supremacy, follow the resources and follow the money. And so why we are emphasizing the importance, or why it's so critical for us to re-examine how students are funded and how community colleges are funded, it is based on that relationship between the idea that those who are been the most harmed, those who have been the most marginalized in our systems, are those who receive the least amount of resources. So when we look, for example, at the funding level of the community college system, we see that the community college system serves more African-American students, and we could just stop the screen share, we could flow. Serve more African-American students, more Latinx, more API students, more students of color. than any other segment of post-secondary education, but receives the least amount of state funding. Follow the money. And so oftentimes we have blamed the students themselves for their own lack of success. And we have even programmed around that idea, said, let's fix the student. That is something deficient, it's something broken about African-American students. It's something within their culture that they don't value education. Let's stop that lie and that narrative and let's kill it today. If anybody has valued education historically, it has been Black folks. Black folks have been the only group that have risked their life in order to be able to read and to be educated. So there's no such thing as a Black community that doesn't value education. The reason why Black folks haven't been successful in our institutions is because our institutions haven't aligned and created an agenda for them to do so. And because the state hasn't invested in their success. And so resources equals outcomes. So the fact that African-American students are not successful because we attend institutions or that to navigate the way through institutions that are the least funded and least resourced. And so we have to say that that has to change. That we have over 300 people on this call. And I truly believe that if we want to tear down this system and erect a new one, that we have the collective energy, power, and wisdom to do so, but we have yet to fully make a choice and a decision that that is what it is that we want to do. If each of us make up our mind today, each of us make up in our mind today that we are going to control the space in which we operate. That may be the front counter of the admissions and records department. It may be the department that you run as dean. It may be you as a department chair. You as a vice president or a president, or you within the classroom as a teacher and a faculty member, make the decision to control that space. Don't wait to ask for permission. Don't wait till you get more information. Don't wait for you to be directed to do something, but make the decision right now at this call at 11:45 a.m. to say that I am going to disrupt the practice and the conditions that exist around me. It would stop immediately.
Sure.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, Dr. Bush. Dr. Elliott, did you want to chime in?
No, brother, I think we're on the right course. You know, we just have to remember who we are here in this presence. And I think we're heading the right way by having these real conversations. So thank you for acknowledging me.
Yeah.
And those
I think the Zoom bombing that's happening right now I think is important. And not to give it energy, but to recognize that our efforts will always be bombed.
And I think
people have always come in to disrupt what it is we're trying to do when we're on the brink of making a movement. Go ahead, Doctor.
No, you make a good point, Dr. Bush. I think we've spent a lot of energy on defense, right? We've spent a lot of energy countering. We're spending a lot of energy, surviving. I can't be. That's a plea for survival.
Let's go.
A plea for existence. A plea for just, acceptance and acknowledgement of just being. And we haven't been able to spend time or energy because we're so distracted with that and thriving and innovating and creating. And when we have in the past, we've seen empires erected when Black folks are allowed. They allow themselves, first and foremost, to display their greatness. So this Zoom bombing, Dr. Bush, is 100% right. This is the energy and the focus of people from white supremacist trolls that have disabled and disarmed Black folks for stepping into their brilliance and excellence. So we're not giving it an energy, but we're going to acknowledge, especially for all of those who identify as non-Black, to welcome to our space and welcome to our reality. As we're talking about solutions, we've got to spend some energy
fighting.
Yeah. Really quick, Dr. Bull, Professor Handy, I think it's the distraction to try to take it off, take us away from the topic at hand, right? We see that we're addressing a specific issue, and we have a lot of people spending a lot of energy trying to distract the conversation. And so I think it's critically important that as we dialogue, we stay on task, we stay on topic, and don't let others pull us into needless conversations that are not addressing our issue, or try to divert, the things that we're doing through actions to enter a space in a way just to be disruptive. So we know the focal point, and we need to stay on that topic.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Dr. Thayer. So what Dr. Thayer was talking about earlier was recommendations that came out of the African American Student Success Town Hall. And number one was race conscious funding allocation, just to recap. And that is adding race as a metric to determine the amount of funding colleges receive. That is centering Blackness, right? When we talk about Black Lives Matter, Black funding matters, as Dr. Bush mentioned. Like, you have to center the issue on where that's coming from. Maintain state investment in student equity and achievement, allocate COVID-19 stimulus monies with a race-conscious perspective. Also, Cal Grant reform, increasing the Cal Grant to cover the total cost of attendance. We talked about the UCs, the CSUs, and the community colleges, and where are all your Black students? And where is the state? You're a taxpayer. This is you. This is the money that you are providing. You have a direct investment in where this goes as well. So updating the Cal Grant eligibility requirements, having the portable Cal grants, we talked about porting that to HBCUs. If our system is not allowing our students to transfer to these universities, and the HBCUs are willing to take, that's the system that we built on our own. Why can't that go with them? And increase.
And let me hit that. Don't run past that Cal Grant, and maybe we'll take some questions, because I think that is a great example of the insidiousness of structural racism. So we have a dynamic, right, where African American students are meeting the standards. They are completing A through G. They are meeting the eligibility for UC and CSU, but because of reduced resources, or because the impaction to CSU and UC, then the standards continue to raise. So there's always a moving of the goalposts as it relates to Black folks. So the goalpost gets moved, and the people who get pushed out from the impaction of CSU and UC are inevitably Black and brown students. And so those students still wanting to get a bachelor's degree, still wanting to push through their education, have to go out of state. And so then when they go out of state, what happens? They're paying out of state fees, right? The additional cost of having to move and relocate. And so they're taking out additional student loans and getting in debt. So even when we try to do the right thing and play by the rules of the games in which other folks determine, by focusing on going to college and receiving that message, we are creating further harm, because Black families and brown families in those situations have to bear greater financial burden. But at the same time, for those 18 years that their child grew up, you were still paying taxes to go into the Cal Grad system. And when you leave the state, you leaving those tax dollars. So the portable Cal Grant idea is to break the acidity of that cycle, that if my mama paid taxes for me to go to college, and if I can't get denied access to the CSU and UC, I should better take that money with me, so I don't be in further harm financially in pursuing post-secondary education out of state.
And that's a commentary of the cyclical oppression of these systems, how they work. Last week we talked about that whole educational, the preschool to prison pipeline. We're also having another pipeline of education to economic enslavement, of shackles of debt. Folks can't access the homes. You have no capital. So you're talking about also eliminating the workforce barriers that exist for our people.
Dr. Bull, before we continue there, I want to jump back though. I want to go back to something at the beginning that we said the conversation, that we know we have other folks engaging with us right now from across the country, from across the world, from across different industries, in the health industry, in the K through 12 industry, in the A2MEND organizations, industries, and higher ed, specifically California community colleges. But to those who are engaging with us, who are watching, who are listening, who are asking the question that how can they mobilize these uncomfortable conversations and lift up innovative, progressive means for solving the systemic racial barrier that takes place just outside of higher ed, but in corporate America and K through 12, and working in the public industry, in the justice industry. So for the board, what is it that somebody can do who's listening right now to help move the conversation along and progressively and innovatively help solve or get the work done in their industry as well that you're doing with different type of resolutions in the higher ed industry?
And this is kind of piggybacking off what Dr. Thayer mentioned earlier with working with different collaborations and coalitions and organizations that are like-minded. So propelling the conversation just from one aspect of change to making it more systemic.
Yeah, I'll jump in. We talked about race consciousness, and we talked about it earlier in relation to race consciousness in terms of budget allocation. I think one of the things that we need to do is to expand the race consciousness and elevate it as a framework for all of our decision making. So regardless of where you work and where you work, we have to understand that there's no such thing as a neutral practice or policy. I want to say that again. There is no such thing as a neutral, race neutral policy or practice. And so one of the things that I would recommend to leaders and folks on this call is to adopt a mindset around the notion that we need to interrogate all practices and policies through a race conscious lens. And ask the question, who wins and who loses when a decision is being made? So I'll use a community college example, one that we're struggling with in my district. It's like an add-drop policy. So when you decide whether or not you're going to drop students because they have paid their fees or didn't pay their fees, what timeline you give, look who is harmed by that decision. And then you will begin to get an understanding that there's no such thing as race neutral policy.
Look at it later.
When you engage our unions and academic senates and other managers and administrative team, we need to elevate beyond this idea of just having an interest-based approach. But we also have to embed an idea, a concept called a race-conscious approach. We have to create a new set of ground rules for how we engage each other based on this idea that we're going to dismantle all forms of institutionalized racism and begin to construct and rebuild systems and structures that have all students in mind from the onset. And so I think we'd be very intentional and very deliberate around identifying those practices that we know are harming Black students. We spent decades having remedial educational practices that we knew was harming Black students. And how many of us was bystanders to that for multiple decades, knowing the harm it was doing? We were just like those police officers who sat around and watched because we did not want to go up against our union. We did not want to walk into those department meetings and say, look, I am willing to put my job on the line, my reputation on the line, me not being liked by everybody on my own damn campus all of the time, and say I would not sit idly by and protect a practice and a policy that's hurting Black and brown folks. We got to make a decision to love our students, to love justice, to love freedom and liberation more than we love the idea of pulling in a paycheck. We just have to.
Yes.
That's the choice that we have to make today.
Thank you, Dr. Bull. Thank you, Dr. Bush. And that
Can
Can I come in after Dr. Bush, because I wanna, you know, he that's a call to action, and I wanna further that by saying every one of us should go back to our campuses and ask our science departments how they're testing students. Some of our science departments have decided to implement or really worry more about our students cheating versus their success and their mental well-being. And so there is a software that I must call out so that everybody can be held accountable. It's called Proctorio. I had never heard of it 2 weeks ago. And there is a feature in Proctorio called Lockdown. And it took 2 of our Black students coming forward and saying, you know, this doesn't feel right. And frankly, the excuses, and I don't believe that the science folks did this intentionally. I have to give them the benefit of the doubt. But the optics of that should make everyone uncomfortable, that we would put students going through a pandemic and an emergency through further trauma by placing them in lockdown. And so, frankly, we're in the process of shutting that down. One, it didn't even go through our college's process. Some folks got some free software from the chancellor's office, and I'm not trying to call out the chancellor's office, but somebody didn't vet this. And if they did, they ought to be ashamed of themselves, because we don't want to place anyone in lockdown, subject anyone to lockdown during a pandemic. And so, you know, that speaks to what Dr. Bush is saying, is that somebody has to stand up and say it's not right. And really was another math faculty who did stand up and say, you know what, this doesn't feel right that we're subjecting our Black and brown students or any students during an emergency to this software. And so I want to make sure that you all are aware of that if you're not, but you should go ask some questions. And frankly, we're going on record saying, I don't care if they cheat, as long as they are trying to continue their education. Now, of course, we don't want them to cheat. There's other ways to scare them and talk about the implications of cheating on sequence of classes. And I mean, there's some other ways to approach this versus taking on the software. And I'm sorry, I just had to say that, Dr. Bush.
No. Yeah, no need to apologize. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Bull. Yeah, Dr. Shabazz, thank you for that. Thank you, Dr. Bush. There's no need to apologize. And what we are suggesting in response to the question that was asked is this just a moment in time, or and what can I do to make action take place? What you're hearing being laid out is that, 1, follow the money, 2, speak up, right? Wherever you are, wherever you navigate, in the department meetings, at the administrative level, it is time for some action. It's time to speak up. It is time to not continue standing idle, because by standing idle is also how we're going to get you on murder charges, just like the 3 police officers that were standing idle for 8 minutes and 40-something seconds while George Floyd was getting knelt on. So you are an accomplice by standing idle in your department meetings. You are an accomplice by standing idle as an administrator and not following the money to equity programs. You are accomplice by standing idle on those email chains that come through and not responding. You are an accomplice by standing idle and not participating in those affinity groups and helping other Black and brown people organize. So don't stand idle, because this is how we turn this moment into a movement, by continuing moving. The key parts of it, you have to do something, right? The root word of movement is to move. So you have to do some sort of action, and whatever action that you can do where you are, take action. Go ahead, Dr.
Professor Ehan, I think, you know, I also want to acknowledge the courage and bravery of, you just had 2 Black male college presidents call out practices, knowing there's a systemic and structural shared governance process in place, knowing that this type of commentary may come back and potentially impact them in some type of way. That requires courage and speaking truth to power. That's what's being displayed. So I see numerous board members on this Zoom as I'm scrolling through. This is the type of leadership, of courage and honesty that you need at your helm if you want to enact this, you know, institutional systemic change. This type of honesty and bravery. This is the unfiltered part. where we can call out practices. And Dr. Shabazz is hitting on certain things that we can truly unpack in series of the grading system itself, the way it's set up. I mean, A, B, C, D, F. Let's not forget the fact that skipped over E first and foremost. But the fact that what's the difference between an A and a C or a B and a C? When you failed better, when you passed better, you passed at a successful rate. What's the difference between an 88 and a 90? 2 percentage points differentiates an A and a B student. What's between D and F? You failed or you failed worse? Like we've adopted grading and assessment policies that have no substantiation of success at all. So even we're witnessing GREs and ACTs and SATs being dismantled for the UCs and looking at GPAs that as indications of success. So Dr. Shabazz, even if you focus on the proctor and focus on cheating, let's elevate the conversation to our assessment metrics, period. That is a systemic, racialized process in which there has a huge deleterious impact on our students. So as we continue this conversation, I want to tap in Dr. Aaron Vines, who's been part of conversations throughout the system with colleagues and partners with the Black Policy Summit of the Coalition to talk about additional high impact recommendations. So Dr. Vines, can you tell us about—
Sorry about that, having technical difficulties, but I believe you tapped me in for the Chancellor's Office principals?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. I didn't catch it all. I'm working on a couple items here, a couple computers, but the Chancellor's Office has taken a unprecedented bold stance at addressing Black systemic racism and police brutality. Mostly that's from Chancellor Oakley's comment he sent to everybody in the system through a video recording that basically denounced police brutality. And it's unprecedented because in my time in the community college system, I haven't seen a chancellor take the bold stance and willing to address it head on, knowing there's going to be repercussions and there's going to be those that do not agree. But the high impact practices that the Chancellor's Office has called on are system-wide review of law enforcement and first responders, given that many of those first responders and law enforcement, they do come from the community colleges. So we have to make sure we're training them up right to be able to police and assist to be first responders appropriately. Also, there's talk about open dialogue. It's very important for the open dialogue so that folks can understand how people are feeling, what they're going through, instead of just sitting and having no response, being in silence. Also looking at inclusive classroom, anti-racist curriculum, which is so needed, as well as equity plans in diversity, equity, and inclusion. But this time around, what my hope is that the fight continues, the movement continues, because it does seem at times that police brutality and murder by police to Black males in particular and women, that it's become normalized. And I'm hoping that this movement is one that never slows down and continues the momentum and is never normalized. So with that, thank you, Dr. Bull.
Oh, thank you. Let's unpack that one piece about practices and policies and trainings of first responders. We know a lot of our police academies in our system produce the police officers that are on the streets of California. So that is a direct causation, not a correlation, a direct causation of what's going on. And so I'm gonna invite a couple of board members. Let's go ahead and unpack that piece. I mean, I'm gonna ask the question, is it okay enough that they take a Black studies class to understand the plight of Black people before they patrol the streets as a mandated course, part of the training? Or do we need to even dig deeper than that?
I would say, I think it's a start, right? You start looking at curriculum, you start looking at making sure that whoever's going to be going into these fields, especially with that type of responsibility, that they understand what they're dealing with in regards to, different groups. If we're talking about African-American, Black individuals, just say that you have to have some cultural competency training. You have to make sure that's reaffirmed and reassessed on a consistent and ongoing basis. That's what we do in our system, right? We want to make sure we're equipping the individuals with the necessary skill sets, and we're always continually trying to improve those, right? We don't just say we taught you something and we stop change. I think it's important as we assess and reassess, we look at our processes, because we're bound by that. We're bound by being reflective on what we do. And so I think, those type of requirements, especially in the face of the incidents that come far too often, as we watch in horror. So I think some of those ideas definitely can be implemented, and it's a good way to begin to take an action step to do something towards a systemic change. And I think through state organizations, the statewide chancellor's office, statewide academic senate support, those type of groups, we can leverage the influence and make sure that we're doing the thing that is most beneficial for the students, for society, and for us all. So I think those are great initial steps in this conversation, in this work, and actually doing something to have an impact on the outcomes that our students are facing.
Dr. Bull, I want to chime in here too. Thanks, Dr. Thayer. I agree with everything you said there, Scott. And training important, cultural competency important, but it still never ceases to amaze me that you can become a police officer, for instance, in 5, 6, 7 months. You get a gun, a badge, you're out. It takes you 7 years to become an attorney. If you compare the two things that really comprise our law enforcement system, those that enforce the law and those that interpret and understand it, of course. But in 5, 6, 7 months, you're out, you have a gun. So that's a key piece to how much authority those folks are given with such limited training and a quick turnaround in terms of time period for them to be available to do that. So on the other end of things, it's a matter of accountability that we also have to tap into this discussion on. What happens if you are a cop or somebody who is trusted to enforce the law, be an authority figure, and you do something wrong? And what we've seen time and time again is that those individuals are protected, things are hidden, swept under the rug. I mean, that's where the whole movement, now cops are wearing body cams, and people are videotaping any altercations with law enforcement or any of their interactions. And we still are seeing awful behavior with, and we know not every police officer is bad. I want to make sure that's clear. I'm not coming off that way. But the ones that are or who violate the trust that we have in them, we have to have swift, if not swifter and more consequential outcomes for their poor performance or poor behavior. And I think that is sorely lacking. So there's two ends of the approach. There's their training and also dealing with those who continue to abuse their power.
And let me hit that a bit, because we shouldn't, this called out hypocrisy. And so if we believe, and I agree that that's necessary for the training to be police officers, then why wouldn't it be necessary to those who we entrusted to educate our children and educate our students? And so we have folks who are leading colleges right now. We have people who are teaching our students right now. We have folks who are serving our students right now that there's no requirement for them to go through any mandatory training. We talk about the need to have body cams on police. We need to have body cams in our classroom sometimes, because the brutality of Black bodies don't just exist in the streets by the hands of police officers. Brutality exists when 75% of your Black students are failing. Brutality exists when your Black students can't get through from the point of application to enroll in your institution. It's brutality to have your Black students can go through their entire educational career at your institution and never have a Black professor. It's brutality to have your Black students in career and technical programs where it's difficult to earn a living wage, Then the programs that you have where students have high earnings, you can't find a Black student in those programs. That is brutality. So we're going to talk about mandatory training, or the need for folks to have Black studies in their education or ethnic studies. It starts with our educators. And I've heard folks who are looking to be chancellors and presidents comfortable saying that I'm not have expertise in issues of equity.
That actually opens a question.
We have go ahead.
That's actually a question from the chat. I'm gonna ask you directly. What is your response to the creation of a diversity officer as the answer to this, or having a nonchalant, cavalier approach to diversity?
If I could chime in before Ed answers that, I was moved. I had an employee space yesterday, and our AFT leadership was there. Our president of AFT is there, happens to be a white man, and I have to give him props that he came in and said to his white colleagues, "This is our problem. That Black folks and other folks, they don't have this problem. We have this problem." And he that day didn't just sit on the rhetoric. He sent out an email to our district to make a motion, an appeal to create a mandatory cultural competency training for all employees before they interact on the campus. He said, if we can make them do that before they teach online, why can't we make people do that before they go into the classroom in front of these students?
Thank you for that, because I hear people saying that, and we're going to get back to your question, Dr. Bull, but a lot of comments that I hear are, we're tired of meetings. We're tired of resolutions and circles of solidarity. We want to see the receipts. We want to see the receipts. We want to see the implementation of new requirements, new legislation, new bar for really addressing the racism in all our industries, and specifically higher ed industry. So thank you for saying that, because that is very important. Dr. Bull?
Yeah, I just want to do a time check. We got 15 minutes to wrap up. We've unpacked and really unveiled quite a few high impact training and practices within our system and outside of our system. But I want to tap back Dr. Bush on that commentary when he said it was just baseline to have that. And so we've noticed that, to Dr. Breland's point, we've got an accountability piece, and really justice is moving from compliance to action, right? There's a lot of trainings going on. People going to these trainings, it's phenomenal. They're checking off boxes.
Yes.
Action is not occurring. So can y'all help us move from, once we roll out these policies and high impact procedures, the accountability piece, especially for those people on here? Go ahead, Dr. Bush, and whoever wants to hop on.
Yeah, and I'll take that question. I mean, I'm gonna kind of circle back a little bit to how I feel when I answer that. I mean, in the midst of the pain, frustration, there's also a sense of hope and empowerment. And I think we'll be remiss if we leave this call with a sense of energy around the problem being so big that is outside of our control to change it. As I scroll through your faces and the names and pictures that's on this call, you are the ones that is going to change this system. You are the ones. Don't look for us as members of A2MEND. Don't look for other folks within your institution. The accountability piece, Dr. Bull, that you mentioned, I think is a personal accountability that we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard before we can hold anyone else to any other type of standard. And so we have to make a personal decision about what is it that we need to root out of ourselves before we try to root anything out of a system and a structure. So Michelle, Patty, Kenneth, Tim, Christy, Stephen, and all the other names that I'm unable to read because there's too many on this call, you're the ones that just happen to be in my screen. It's about you deciding that you are going to operate and behave in a manner that you know that you're going to be anti-racist, anti-sexist, knowing that you're not going to be a bystander, that you're going to control the space that you are in. Then when we all take a personal accountability and one have the belief that this thing could be different, then we will see systems fall, colleges change, and we will see a more just and equitable institution and society. So I believe that you would make that personal decision, and I believe change is going to occur because Patty decided, because Stephen decided, because Tim decided, because Michelle, because Kenneth decided that they would no longer allow it, and that they assert their privilege and put their privilege on the line and willing to make a sacrifice for justice to happen. And what we don't talk enough about is that no movement, no change has happened without personal sacrifice. You have to be willing to give something up. I'm willing to give up titles, job, position, and money because I believe and I'm hopeful about we can make a difference, that I can make a difference. We would not waste our time and energy for men just to hear ourselves talk, to look at each other on a Zoom call and call you together. We did not believe by the call we are making, we are creating and affirming the activists in you. For you to be empowered to take this, advance it, roll with it, and make sure the space you occupy is different because you are in it.
That's right.
Thank you, Dr. Bush, for that. Dr. Bull, as we begin to try to turn the corner, just for this part of the conversation, because we know that the work is continual. It has to go on outside of this Zoom call. It has to go on outside of what you see on the news. It has to go on in between your texts, your phones, your personal conversations, on the job, with the family. It has to continue going on. But as we try to turn the corner on today's Unscripted Unplugged Part 2, I just want to ask the board a question that everybody here is asking very directly, and any of the board members can respond, but maybe we'll go to Dr. Gabru first. If you could flick your wrists, if you could write a blank check, if you could sit with the current administration, if you could sit with Gavin Newsom, if you could have one Aladdin genie wish that would give an immediate impact right now, what would that be? And conversely, or the second part of the question is, for those that are listening, what would you suggest is the one thing they could do right now that is just an immediate impact?
I think we've touched on a lot of important, critical topics in terms of what we could do, from policy, from looking at things from a systemic approach, from talking about race, from talking about funding, because a lot of times when you look at your budget, when we get funding from the state, it's always categorical money that's tied to Black students or students of color. But there is no general funds when it comes to students who really need the most help. So it really ties back to the budget. But a lot of times, we forget how powerful the words of our students are. We forget that they're crying for help in terms of, they're experiencing so much right now. And when we have these town halls, let's hear what they have to say. They're saying hire, just to make it simple in terms of policy, they're saying hire Black faculty and staff, address these issues in our curriculum. We talked about board of trustees, CIOs, college presidents. If we're not able to be the voice as leaders, let's hear the voice of our students and put them in front of our faculty, put them in front of our board of trustees, put them in front of our CIOs and CSSOs. They are the leaders that we need to hear from, because if we're gonna make impact and we're gonna make change, we're gonna write policy, we need to allow our students to be the voice to help us get there, because a lot of times we've been running in circles. we hear things in the media about Roger Goodell apologizing for what's happening. Would he apologize if George Floyd was still alive? Should he really be apologizing to us and not someone who gave up their career, such as Kaepernick 3 years ago when he was trying to fight for injustice? I mean, let's be real for 1 second. When we talk about voices, at least in higher education, let's use the voice. I apologize, I keep getting muted. I know we're getting hacked. But what I'm really trying to say is let's hear from our students' voices. Let's look at our policies, let's revisit those, and let's take those students to our trustees, to our leaders, and let's not make excuses. You know, if we're gonna make change, all of you, if you can take something back from today to your campuses as a possible solution, go back to your leaders, go back to your faculty and say, in our hiring committees, we are gonna be committed to hiring Black faculty and staff. We're tired of asking those that are not on board. We're tired of the choir trying to make an impact and change to learn how to work with Black students. Let's bring in more folks of color that will understand and help move us along. But I thank you for all those that continue to join us in this fight, in this plight. But at the end of the day, I think we're all not okay, but we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to change the system, to change oppression, to come in unity, to go back to our campuses and not make excuses for those that are silent. And I thank everyone for this dialogue. And I really thank my men brothers, because we're meeting every other night because we want to make an impact. And we hope to make an impact with those of you that are here, but also those that are not here because they need to hear this message.
Thank you, Dr. Gabriel. Thank you for those powerful words. I want to give it back again to the board, to brothers. What is a bullet point, high level headline action step that if you could write a blank check, if you have full control, you have full autonomy, what is something that would make an immediate change in the higher ed industry, maybe in the community, maybe on a national level? And or what is some advice you would give to those that are watching that they could do the moment they hang up the Zoom that will make an immediate impact?
And before y'all hop into that, I want to let y'all know that we do have about 3-4 PowerPoint slides worth of bullet points that we're going to be unloading on our social media of solutions and action steps that have been part of prior conversations. So that's going to be unloaded on A2MEND 2006 on our Twitter, at A2MEND 2006, as well as our IG, our Instagram, and Facebook. So please look out for those recommendations and solutions. Go ahead, Doctor. Go ahead.
I would like to say a high impact practice is taking knees off our students' necks in the classroom, taking knees off of faculty's necks during the hiring process, taking knees off faculty's necks during the tenure process, taking knees off of administrators' necks as they try to lead colleges, and from a very cultural, competent perspective, it's important to take knees off our necks.
I want to add to that. And thank you, Dr. Vines, and thank you, Dr. Bull, for the closeout question in some ways. I know we only have a few minutes, but what I want to urge everybody to do, if you could just wave the wrist or wand or, rub the lantern and make a wish is just to go back and create a coordinated effort in your own spaces and on your campuses or in your place of work or whatever you're doing. It's got to be coordinated. And if we go back to the points that were made in the beginning of this webinar, their emotions are high still. They have the potential to continue to flare up, as the case moves on, charges are brought forward, and there's a trial and there's a verdict. But I want to encourage everybody in your space, use calm, patient, but urgent ways of collecting thoughts and making demands of your system. Collect those in a structured manner. Be strategic about how they're going to be delivered in the community, how they're going to be presented to the boards that represent your districts, to the leadership, the executive leadership, and then be ready to help with those solutions. I can't tell you how many messages I've received of people telling me what needs to happen. I'm like, okay, I get it, but the reality is we're all going to have to do and be in agreement. So I would just say to go back and structurally come up with a plan to make demands that are going to actually make change in the individual areas with the focus on the success of African American and Black students and other students of color and poverty in general. There's a lot we can do as individuals and certainly as institutions to move that pressure within our own institutions and the communities of the people that we serve. So that's what I would urge people to do as an immediate takeaway.
Thank you, Dr. Breland, for that. And I want to thank all of you as we wind down here for coming out. You being here today is a testament, really, for you taking a step in being part of the healing process. I want to revisit back what we set the stage with as being healers and change agents and activists. Like, you are propelled. Something is moving. I'm watching the images. I'm seeing the diversity. And as I'm talking, I want y'all to scroll through the images through Zoom, put it in gallery view and look at the power in the room as well. We've seen people in their living room. We've seen people in their personal spaces, dialed in on a Saturday for an hour and a half. I want to thank you all for taking the time to listen, because that itself relieves a lot of the tone deafness and the energy we have to spend on educating people. The hard-headedness, the ignorance, the arrogance. There was a certain level of arrogance in that officer as he stood on that neck, and he did not listen when they told him he can't breathe, he's going to die. He did not listen. So for you to even come here and listen is an action. That's an action item. But we also want to underscore the urgency as well. The need for now is urgency. And so if you have any people in interim positions, any people that are having to make permanent decisions, Dr. Vine said it so extraordinary well. Take the knees off their necks. Let them go to work and do what they do. You have change agents within your system. Are you a gatekeeper or a gate holder? Are you yourself a barrier? So we need people to let folks that are in positions who are active in your communities, in your respective campuses, who are about that life, who are doing that work. This is their moment and their opportunity to shine. Do not put your knee on their neck for creating systemic change. This is a time where you, as Dr. Bushman said, exercise your privilege. Put yourself, put your body, put your title, put your role on the line to create and block any of the nonsense that's going to propel them from being excellent. So we want to thank you all. I want to thank my brothers from A2MEND, Professor Ian Handy, for holding it down. We want to continue these conversations. Please follow us on our social media platforms and continue to heal. You are the antidotes. You are preventing educational malpractice. Come in there not with a Band-Aid, but a full-on kit. A full-on kit to exit that wound, that deep metastasized illness and cure, illness of racism that's permeated our system. So be the good doctors, y'all. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you for being here.